Right, okay. So we're actually bang on time, pretty much a couple of minutes. I think that's a good start. So I'm going to go over to Pauline, who's our next speaker. Before I do, I'm just going to give a quick introduction, if that's okay. So Pauline is an individual with direct lived experience of gambling harms. Now 10 years into recovery, she is here to share her personal experience, understanding of living with harmful gambling and of several neurodiverse conditions. The title of her talk today is My Lived Experience of Gambling Addiction, Recovery, Bipolar and Neurodiversity, including bipolar disorder. And Pauline, thank you for being here today and wanting to share. And over to you. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Pauline. I'm the Public Relations Officer for Gamblers Anonymous. I'm not going to give a big GA speech because we're here to talk about gambling and neurodiversity, but just a brief introduction for those that don't know. So we're a large lived experience network support of group of compulsive gamblers in recovery to help others to achieve abstinence from gambling. So there's no waiting lists to join, no requirements to join other than a desire to stop gambling. We've 250 meetings each week throughout the country, and we have a few online meetings as well. We're made up of members from all different walks of life and all different backgrounds. In Manchester, where I'm based, we started a new women's support meeting last Saturday, which was well received. We have a website, gamblersanonymous.org.uk, where you can find information about all the groups. We have a national 24-hour information line and 3 local information line numbers, and they can direct people to any of the meetings within England, Wales and Ulster. So basically the rest is my own personal story, not the opinions of GA. So there are lots of many layers to the story, so it's like a jigsaw puzzle. Don't think I'll ever be able to solve it, but first of all, I'm going to take you back to my chaotic childhood. So it might not surprise you to know that it was an abusive childhood. I grew up with alcoholic parents. When my grandparents visited, they were completely absorbed in horse racing, gambling. I never understood it. I didn't know what a 10 pence each way bet was on a horse, and I still don't know what it is. My grandma taught me how to play card games for money. And of course, it seemed like fun to me. I could never lose. She gave me all the bags of coins at the end of the week. We lived near the seaside, and she took me to the bingo at the seaside. And when the cash was gone, it was gone. It was always just a load of fun. I remembered my dad paying a bookies bill on a regular basis, and I just wondered what that was all about. By the time I was 17, I was using alcohol, a small amount of prescription drugs, anything else I could get hold of to blot out my mind all the bad things that were going on in life. I found that I couldn't cope with life very well, and by this stage I was suffering from really dark thoughts. And eventually my friends at college were trying to help me escape from home unsuccessfully, and suggested I go to my family doctor. I managed to trip there, and then he sent me to a place which I'm ashamed to say at that time, out of ignorance, we called the mental hospital. And I was diagnosed with what was called in them days manic depression. So where that came from, as the previous speaker called, was, you know, a kind of thing that was to do with how you were born. I just, you know, had no idea where that came from. I think to me, what mattered most in later life was that I took responsibility for my mental health and my addictions, but that was many years later that I was able to do that. Most importantly in that time was nothing was explained to me. I was treated like an idiot. At that appointment, I had 2 doctors peering at me. I felt completely overwhelmed. They asked me all sorts of questions. I didn't know what was happening to me. I was having hallucinations, but I didn't know what they were. I described to them what was happening, and the psychiatrist told me they were all in my head and I was making it up. So I walked out of that place and I vowed never to tell anybody about it ever again. And I lived with that burden for a further 40 years because of that man. So during my life, I experienced many dark days and I attempted suicide a number of times. Over the next 8 years, before I addressed my drug and alcohol addiction, I was really fortunate. I didn't kill myself through alcohol poisoning, and that was the largest killer of young people at that time. By the age of 25, I managed to come through that period and get my life back on track. And although the bipolar symptoms which I was suppressing were a lot more manageable by the time I stopped that addiction, I wasn't able to live the life of a regular person. I basically had to kind of live a slow and steady life. I couldn't cope with the pressures of a regular job. I didn't get on with anyone at work. I just didn't seem to fit in anywhere. Everything just seemed to get me down. I kind of, what I call, would just plodded on with life. And then I started to get more and more physically sick with autoimmune disorders, something that the previous speaker also mentioned. I'd suffered from them since being a teenager. And some doctors also think they can be related to trauma as well. But over the years, I've worked really hard to release myself from the childhood trauma. So it doesn't really affect my daily life anymore, but I don't think we'll ever know whether there is a physical link with that. But eventually, clean and sober, I got married and tried for children, and discovered I had lupus and a blood clotting disorder. So I'm just giving you the backstory to this, not for sympathy, but during that process, I decided to apply for my medical records to look for clues to do with the miscarriages. And then going back through those medical records, I discovered this manic depression diagnosis, which I had forgotten about. So this was still 25 years ago, and it wasn't really on my radar. So while I still had the symptoms, it just stayed in the back of my head for about another 20 years. So fast forward a number of years, after many struggles, having 2 daughters eventually, and then realizing I'd had them with the wrong person, find myself a single parent running a business in another abusive relationship, once again unable to cope with the stresses and strains of life. I'd isolated myself from any support or friends. I started turning to gaming arcades for stress relief. So I started off with smaller stake items like the ticket machines, but the ones where you could win 800 tickets for big prizes. And one day I started going into the over 18s areas, and I started finding that I was having difficulty working with other people in the jobs that I had. So I'd started my own business. And then once that grew to a point where I had my own staff, then that became problematic. So I still found life so difficult. We got into the stage where we were in a recession. My business was under threat of closure and I was saving up for bankruptcy. And with my last spare £10, I went into this over 18s area and I had quite a biggish win. And then I was hooked. I went back another day, had a big win, so on. And then I had this crazy idea, which I've since found out that many of us do, that I could actually earn money from gambling and that I could beat the machines. If I picked the ones with the biggest jackpots, I could actually win more than I could put in. So I started doing this. I'd forget the days that I had losses. I'd go back and chase the losses, and then I'd chase the wins. What happened right from the start, I began to be suicidal after the losses. And then I could discover that you could do this online for bigger stakes and for more money. And near the beginning of doing this, about 20 jackpots came in on the bounce. Only instead of collecting the huge amount of money that I'd won, I kept doing it for bigger and bigger stakes. And eventually the money whittled down so much, I kept playing it. And I actually managed to withdraw the kind of minimum debt to avoid my bankruptcy, but I still had a huge amount of debt. through the business and through everything. And what happened through this period of time when I was gambling, I barely functioned, but I managed to sustain the bare bones of a business and a family. But my life completely revolved around gambling at gaming centres and online every spare minute of the day, sometimes until 5 a.m, getting up from work at 7 a.m. And I just believe it significantly contributed to the really severe health issues which I suffer from today. On one occasion during this time, I tried to mention bipolar to a GP that I trusted, and it was in the back of my mind. And he said he didn't believe I had it because although he'd seen me severely depressed, he hadn't known me to be manic. And at the time, the mania was expressed as staying up all night gambling, but he didn't know about any of that, so I just left it. And looking back, I can see that my mental health problems were really getting out of control, along with the gambling. My mind was racing all the time, the wins were excessive highs, and the losses were driving me to suicidal urges. The highs and lows of the bipolar were huge. I couldn't cope with any aspect of life. My work, my kids, I isolated myself from my friends. I couldn't tolerate anybody. My reaction to the abuse that was happening to me was fear. So all I did was shout in reaction to that because I was frightened. So I spent my whole life in a rage. All my teenage kids saw of me for a few years, it was mum in a rage or mum gambling. I sometimes managed to calm down a bit at work. I was a professional cake maker and I shut one business, which was a shop, and then I started up a mobile cake decorating business. So we used to do these workshops, and I literally taught hundreds and hundreds of people how to decorate cakes, and it was really successful during the recession. So I managed to calm down a bit most of the time to do that, but all the time I was getting really ill from autoimmune conditions as well. I suffered from severe hallucinations, and my life felt absolutely horrific, and the only solution to anything and everything for many years was gambling. And there were just things niggling at me at the back of my mind. I knew my partner was deliberately doing things to me, but reality really hit me one day because I realised that gambling wasn't solving my problems anymore. I realised that gambling was my problem. It was quite traumatic getting to Gamblers Anonymous. My abusive partner had also gambled. Maybe wasn't compulsively gambling, but he didn't want to stop. And at this stage, I was getting so many dark periods and thoughts of suicide, especially after heavy losses. And I'd phoned the Samaritans a number of times, and he'd actually stopped me from phoning them. And he told me I didn't really want to kill myself, otherwise I wouldn't have been calling the Samaritans. He said I would have just actually killed myself and not rang them. He tried to prevent me from going to GA, which I'd said to him about 6 months before I was going to go to GA. He kept telling me I didn't need to go. So I tried going to bed early to stop myself from gambling, and I felt terrible, like a drug addict coming off drugs. I was isolated, as apart from him, I'd gambled alone most of the time. I'd not told anyone about my problems, financial or otherwise, and I was just absolutely desperate. Every time I'd gone to bed early, he would persuade me to get up and get dressed and take me out to an arcade to gamble, and no matter how hard I resisted, he would just keep on at me until I did it. And one night I just felt the strength to say to him, "You're not going to stop me. I'm going to Gamblers Anonymous tonight." And that was the end of our relationship. 6 months later, I told him to leave for good. So there's another twist to this, because I said a while back I kept the bipolar hidden. It was still on my medical records and it was still in the back of my mind. And so just over 10 years ago, I stopped gambling after that first GA meeting, and I really started to recover. And so life became more manageable and things became calmer. So I'm not going to focus on my recovery, just the mental health side of things. So just assume my recovery was okay. I've not gambled since the day I walked into GA, and I'm very grateful for that. If I hadn't stopped gambling, I know full well I would have committed suicide. But because I kept the bipolar hidden, I didn't understand anything about my mental health or about how my mind really worked. The hallucinations didn't stop, or what I like to call my quirks didn't vanish. I still kept ignoring them, or just blocked them out. And so entrenched from me, from my past experience with doctors, if I mentioned my mental health issues, that I couldn't get proper treatment for my physical health issues. And so because that happened for so many years, I developed a medical phobia for which I required a course of CBT, which was problematic in itself. I did meet a very nice person, so I managed to cope with that treatment. It's not completely cured, but it is an awful lot better, because if I get a GP or a doctor that's a little bit funny with me, I just won't see that person again. Another angle to this, which is the nice angle, that during that course of CBT, I managed to admit that I had many phobias, not all of those are cured, but I managed to deal with the fear of small dogs. And I managed to adopt 2 small dogs who actually really saved me from some dark days. But my life going forward from that, I still had really bad ups and downs, and I didn't really understand why I found life still so hard to cope with in recovery. But moving on, in 2015, I got really, really sick. And I saw one of the nicest specialists I've ever met in the NHS. And the bad side is he can't cure my neurological issues. And that's something I've had to learn to live with one day at a time. And I wonder how much of that also could be linked with the neurodiverse issues. But again, that's something we'll never know. And I have one of the worst cases of rare migraines it's ever come across. And have multiple times taken me to the brink of death, actually, which is no explanation for it. And I'm under one of the top professors of neurology in the Northwest. And try as he might, he can't sort it out. And he can't explain it despite trying everything he can. Now, this is another backstory, because although I've suffered from various types of migraines since my early 20s, they became debilitating and hospitalizing me in 2015, and having tried every single method of treatment possible. He started treating me with sodium valproate in 2016. Now, the medical people on here are probably shouting at the screen, mood stabilizer, but I knew nothing of this. So I was accidentally now being treated for bipolar. So I only actually knew it was bipolar, still thinking it was called manic depression, after reading Apple News on my phone a number of years ago. And then I also accidentally found out that sodium valproate through a friend, that it was sometimes used to treat bipolar. It's often not often used to treat migraines, only epilepsy. It's not licensed for migraines, so it has to be prescribed by a consultant. So a few years ago, I suffered a bleed on the brain due to migraines, and they got a lot worse again. So the neurologist recommended changing my medication to a different medication. So that was the first time I had to explain to somebody, it might not be a good idea to remove the valproate, because actually I don't feel as suicidal anymore, and why. So that was okay. I'd had a lot of stress that year, and I didn't actually feel as suicidal. And I recognised that it had a positive effect. So enter 2023. Last year, the neighbours from hell moved in. I had constant dog barking, sensory overload from 3 dogs, 4 to 6 hours at a time, up until 3 a.m. in the morning. I was unable to go out in my back garden. They didn't walk their dogs. Dog feces was piled up for 3 months, absolutely stunk. I got the council involved. I did exactly the correct procedures. They didn't bother. I expressed them how bad my mental health was getting. They didn't do anything. My mental health deteriorated last year over the course of 12 months. I couldn't sleep properly in any of the 3 bedrooms I have. My youngest daughter got addicted to drugs and wasn't taking care of herself. Our relationship deteriorated. I was powerless to do anything. She was in an abusive relationship. She conned me out of money. She moved to Ireland. On one occasion, she went missing. The Irish police didn't help. On another occasion, she took a cocaine overdose and kept calling me throughout the night and putting the phone down. I thought she was going to die. It affected my eldest daughter really badly, who I have a close relationship with, and she didn't want to speak for a while. And it caused me a lot of distress. It sent me spiraling into a dark place. My partner, who I live with, got a potential diagnosis of early onset Alzheimer's, and that's still not resolved. And all this happened in a really short space of time. And the one thing I was really grateful for, I had enough absence for gambling that it never occurred to me once to gamble, and I could still go to my GA meetings and demonstrate to people, no matter what you're going through, you can still get through this without gambling. So I got through to about March last year, but my hallucinations were so badly out of control and my bipolar was so badly affected, I did eventually speak to my GPs about it. So I had to fully come out about this now. So I was shocked to find out that once I spoke to my GP and found the courage to ask for help, it was such a big step for me that I was told, if you are having these regular episodes, you should have regular support. But by December, and things had carried on, my mental health was so poor, the council dropped the case against the neighbours and refused to do anything at all. And I was just having regular suicidal thoughts, which I couldn't get rid of. I was regularly ringing the Samaritans, and they were great. I couldn't sleep. I was staying up to 3 a.m. every morning. I don't take any other medication than the valproate because they've agreed it wouldn't benefit me as an addict. And I struggled to take a lot of other regular non-addictive medications for the other conditions, and I sometimes struggled to take those. The neighbour committed a public order offence against me, coming round to my house screaming and swearing at me on my own doorstep. Police did take care of that. But I came to the end of 2023 knowing I had to find a better way to acknowledge and to deal with all of this, and I couldn't let the other events and other people have control over my life. And then one of the things the GP did was provide me 6 sessions with the psychologist through their mental health team. And we discussed some of the other things, the way that I look at things, and neurodiverse issues. And then so many things in my life began to make sense to me. Like, for example, and the things that the previous speaker spoke about. For example, when I'm working on something, I need to concentrate. And if somebody comes and disturbs me, I actually want to shout at them not to come near me because I'm concentrating. Why? I get completely overwhelmed with sounds, smells, taste, touch, fabrics like wool I can't have anywhere near me. I hate things like cushions, secondhand clothes. I also have loads of allergies to perfumes and chemicals. I don't think that's a coincidence. And when I told my daughter about this, like sensory processing disorder, and she said, "Mum, I think you're actually autistic." And I was like really offended. If noise becomes excessive, like what was happening with the neighbours, 2 or 3 hours of dog barking, I literally start shaking and my brain doesn't function. I have voices in my head shouting random thoughts, and I've had those all my life, but now I can acknowledge them instead of ignoring them, and I can just ask them to go away. Sometimes I have funny voices. I make cake toppers and they're little characters and they talk to me, and now I can laugh and I can talk to them back. I used to think there was something wrong with me and I have to block them out, and now that's fine, that's okay. When I'm stressed, the hallucinations can be horrendous, and they are things that I'm scared of. I can't get rid of the fear of spiders. Spiders, insects, crawling, and I itch terribly. Sometimes I see a dog or a cat, that's fine, I can deal with that. And I do actually feel pain when I feel emotions, or if someone cuts or hurts themselves, or I see something gruesome on the telly. I see people's faces in crowds turning into horror movies faces, and that can be quite frightening. These are just a few of the things. The list goes on. And then I had a screening with the mental health practitioner and recently, and she said there's a high probability I have borderline personality disorder, some way autistic, and elements of ADHD, which I never considered before. And your waiting list has been described 2 years long, but I understand so much more about myself, and I'm so at peace with that. So I found a spiritual peace and an antidote that for me does go a bit beyond what is in the steps of GA. It's a personal thing, and I've discovered that I've had this all along. So I kind of thought, well, I need to work out why I'm here, what I'm going to do about it, and how I'm going to get through all this. And now the reality is I've had these 6 sessions from a couple of different sources, and now like there isn't really any ongoing support apart from if I need crisis help, I can ring the Samaritans or I can ring a helpline. And I've learned my own strategies, and probably the best thing I've learned from GA in terms of this is like how to live my life and integrate, is to live my life one day at a time, like with my mental and physical health issues. And so that's been like a really, really useful tool. I've learned that recognizing the neurodiversity in myself, it's easy to spot in other people. I recently met a young man at a GA meeting a few weeks ago, and he shared he'd been recently diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So I shared a bit of my story as well. And we spoke afterwards, and I said to him, like, I'm not being rude, but I knew there was something about you. And he said he knew there was something about me. So I asked him how, and we both had to laugh because he said the way you look and the way you dress. And another thing, I'm always really hyper aware of my surroundings and other people around me and their proximity to me. And I think I am actually a really excellent driver because I hyper concentrate on everything. But you know, like I said, beware the person that comes near me when I'm decorating a cake, because I'm gonna blow your head off. But I do try not to. I have to try really hard to sort of be polite to people and be conscious that I don't just ramble on about, oh, I've been doing this, that, and the other. I've been having a busy day. I've been doing this all week. I have to actually make an effort to ask people, oh, how's your day? How's your week? And not just blurt on. And I've come to understand over the last 6 months, it's not just because of my physical disabilities, how hard it is for me to go to the shops or something like a concert. I wondered for ages, why do I get grumpy? And why do I find it difficult to enjoy myself? Because someone's being too loud, or they're not being thoughtful enough, or whatever little thing I felt that it was doing wrong. And it is probably autistic traits. I've also had to tackle a bully and a stalker this year, which I did head on. And now I feel like I'm not scared of those things anymore. I might be a bit nervous, but I'm not scared because I finally found who I am and I found my voice. I found that I'm good at verbalizing things on paper. And because I'm not good at letting go of things, I can park it for now, and I can write a letter about it when I have time. And I found a lot of power in words. So with regards to the council, I made a complaint which they ignored. So I went through the process and made a second stage complaint, which yielded a reasonable result. With regards to the garden, there's further work to be done. I took one company to the financial ombudsman and won, and I threatened 2 others to get my money back for stuff. And that worked. And that's still my same brain that lets things bug it, but now it's just turning it around and looking at it from a different perspective. So not letting things get me down as much, but being able to take positive action. So not feeling controlled and depressed, but being able to take more control, but being careful not to let myself go over the top where I could stay up all night and write letters, so not allowing myself to do that. I can still have highs and lows for weeks, but just not so extreme. And I can still let things upset me to the point where I have suicidal urges, and sometimes very strong ones. But I have mechanisms where I can call people and talk about it, and sometimes including the Samaritans. But it feels great to be able to do that and honest, and not just let it fester inside, but just have the mechanisms to let it go. And one big benefit within my GA groups, to be myself and being my open and honest, has made it much easier for other people to be honest, to talk about their own issues, whether it be neurodiverse diverse issues or ADHD or other issues which they might have been embarrassed about. And now they know that they'll be accepted within the rooms, no matter who they are, what their problem is. Probably my biggest challenge is still self-care, but I'm trying as much as I can. And I think the more spirituality I have personal to me, the easier that becomes. Which leads me to my final comment, that allowing myself to fully accept myself inside my head, whatever that looks like on any given day, good or bad, it's allowed me to finally be happier than I've ever been in my whole life, despite the fact I'm still seriously ill. I'm still fighting to get my partner a dementia diagnosis, and I'm still fighting the council over the neighbours. I'm still me. I'm free from the chains that have been holding me back all my life, and I'm not actively addicted to anything. Although I have enough Dr. Martens to last me until I die, but they're bought and paid for. I'm not in any debt. I have enough houseplants that it takes me an hour to water them all, but they bring me peace and they're good for the environment. And that's basically me in a giant multicolored nutshell. And thank you for listening. That's it. Thank you.
Pauline, thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for sharing that very personal story. And I think it's always really interesting to hear how other people's lives exist, how they cope with lives and the various challenges. Yeah, I'm sure it will create a lot of thoughts in a lot of people who are listening. I'm not sure if there's anyone would have a direct question. I don't know if anyone wants to raise a hand for a direct question, but if not, then what I would suggest is that it is now probably a good time to take a short break. And if everyone's all right with that, we'll resume at 11:30. And Pauline, once again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Pauline.